But when you do want to make a change, you need a small child to do it for you.
Yeah.
Matt?
Hey, I'm Matt, and welcome to the 2021 Pinkbike Summer Field Test at Sun Peaks. The new Norco range was one of the most highly anticipated bikes of 2021 after multiple spy shots were leaked from racing and testing. A lot has changed since the old range. In fact, they aren't even really in the same category. The travel has increased by 20 mils, and the horse link has kind of been flipped upside down. Not only that, but the geometry is much more aggressive, and the new frame, with a few changes, has even been spotted on the World Cup for downhill racing. Okay, so the first thing that catches your eye about this stealth bomber is the high pivot and the idler wheel. It's a little bit different than the Orum HSP because it's not just a single pivot, but rather a virtual high pivot. There's plenty of space inside this front triangle for a water bottle, and underneath the top tube is an accessory mount. Then at the back, there's a little fender to keep debris out of the suspension. Okay, on to the geometry. As I mentioned, each size is tweaked to follow Norco's ride-aligned philosophy. The head angle starts at 63.75 for a small and decreases by 0.25 each size. Okay, so let's talk suspension, the virtual high pivot. We've got one pivot up here at the idler, one at the dropout, one that's around the bottom bracket that drives the shock, and another tiny one just off of that on the chainstay. One thing that Norco noticed in testing was that the rearward axle path gave short riders enough clearance even with a 29-inch wheel. Norco highly advises against the use of an air shock on this bike because the kinematics are so specifically tuned to a coil. They recommend the Fox DHX2 or a RockShox Super Deluxe coil. The new range doesn't have an aluminum option, and at 37 pounds for a size large, it's easy to see why Norco stuck with only carbon construction. Up front, they've gone with a Fox factory level 170mm 38 with the Grip 2 damper. Okay, so that's it on the suspension details. We've talked enough about that. Let's go see how it rides.
All right, guys, we should probably talk about how the downhill bike we have on test climbs. So the Norco range with the highest of pivots, it has an idler pulley to make it all work. So how does it climb?
Yeah, you know what? It does pedal pretty well. It has a really nice steep C-tube angle. And that idler does have a little bit of drag once you get it in the top 3 cogs.
I want to stop on that drag.
Yep.
So if you're out all day, let's say you're going out for like a 3-4 hour ride, you want to climb to the top of this big mountain and do this awesome descent on the range a couple times. It's a steep climb, so you're probably living in the big cog. Maybe not you, I am.
Yeah,
Isn't that annoying?
I know you don't like the idler thing. There is a little bit of drag, but you know, this is a 170mm bike front and rear. This thing absolutely trucks. So, you know, you're probably not gonna purchase this bike if you're looking for like all day epic bike.
Henry, I want to ask you about expectations. What do you expect when it comes to climbing on a bike like the Norco range?
I think something like the Norco range it shows that how versatile a modern enduro bike can be. This is a bike, like you said, that the same frame can strap a downhill fork on there and go to the World Cup. If you have the right angles and your weight is in the right place, yes, it might bob. Yes, you might hear the gentle whir of an idler. But actually
the gentle whir of an idler. That's not what my legs tell me.
That's normally what they say about you at work, eh? But what it means is you can get to the top of pretty much anything.
Yeah.
And I think it's about time that in an enduro bike, you know, pedaling performance and the way it climbs up the hill and weight aren't the most reliable parameters of performance.
That's fair.
People want to pin it downhill, and that's what the Norco's can enable you to do.
That's what it's made for. So expectation-wise, I think it's fair to say, like, when you're on that range, you just want to get to the top, right?
Yeah, totally.
So it feels relatively efficient. When it's open and has a ton of traction, we still gotta talk about the efficiency test time for sure. I know this is not the bike for that, and whoever is gonna buy this range probably doesn't care, but it did have the slowest climb time on the efficiency test.
Okay.
2 minutes, 13 seconds. So 13 seconds slower over 2 minutes compared to the fastest time, which is the WeAre1. But to be fair, those are probably different customers, aren't they?
Yeah, totally. You know, this bike is built for the nastiest stuff. And like we said, we've seen it on the World Cup with a couple other tweaks. And the WeAre1 yeah, really light bike, very low front end, super capable climber.
I think it depends which way you phrase it. Is this a slow climbing enduro bike or a fast climbing downhill bike?
Oh, that's pretty
Yeah.
good. Okay, Matt, we're at the top. It took us a whole lot longer than it did on maybe a lighter, faster bike.
Sure.
But we're here. It's time to go back down. What's the story with that high pivot suspension and the idler? It looks like the thing just goes through everything. Is that the case?
Yeah, you know what? It's really quiet with that Onyx hub. It just makes you feel like you're going fast over all the small bumps. It just propels you forward all the time. And it really keeps you nice and central in the bike. The small bump was great. The mid stroke was good. The bottom out was excellent, and all with a coil shock.
Yeah. Does it feel like 170 mils? Like, would you guess it's 170 mils, or would you think it's more, or maybe less?
Yeah, it feels like a little bit more, honestly. Like, it's very efficient in the travel. Like I said, it doesn't blow through the mid, and it's really well balanced with the fork and the sizing. It's quite a bike.
Can you talk to me a little bit about that small bump performance? How important is that for a bike like this that's obviously meant to go fast?
Yeah, it's really good at just keeping speed over those small bumps, even on flatter sections. Really active braking as well. Mm-hmm. And then if you were to compare it to, say, the GT, which also has that high pivot and the idler, they're both pretty close, and they both love to go fast. But the Norco just kind of outshined it a little bit in the slower speed stuff. Yeah.
Okay. I look at that Norco, and that thing, geez, it looks like a cruise ship trying to park in a little tiny lake, you know, when you're on that slower, tighter stuff. How did the bike feel in those situations?
You know what? It's still handled really well. The chainstay is relatively short in the static geometry chart, and then it does get longer. And the Norco also uses the ride-aligned system, which tailors the geometry for different size riders. So the wheelbase and the head angle actually get quite a bit smaller per size as you go down. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it still allows it to be pretty nimble.
Okay, guys, Henry, you first. You've got an enduro race. It's a pretty rowdy course. Are you picking the GT, or are you going to pick the Norco?
For me, it would be the Norco.
Okay.
I just found, and it comes down to sizing again, it comes down to personal preference. But of all the bikes on test, the ones that were just how I expected a bike to be were the Transition and the Norco. I think they just suited me, they fit me really well, and that can't be overstated, having a bike that simply fits you.
Right, yeah, okay. Matt, you might have an EWS race soon, I think. Would you take the GT, or would you take the big Norco?
Again, another close one. I did like both bikes, and the GT went pretty quick as well. I think they were very comparable times.
Yeah.
But the Norco actually had quite a bit shorter seat tube, and it just allowed me to move around the bike. It's also a little bit lower center of gravity. Mm-hmm. So yeah, for that, I can't really see any downsides. I'd probably choose the Norco.
Okay. So speaking of times, Matt, you did a bunch of time testing on these bikes. Mm-hmm. What time did the GT do? What time did the Norco do? And how close were they?
Oh man. Yeah, but basically if we rounded it to the 10th, they were on the same time. So very close. Hard to remember all the different runs and what went good, what went bad, but they were very consistent, and the track didn't change a lot. So
did the Norco have the fastest descent time?
No, it didn't. It was about 3 seconds slower. So the YT had the fastest descent time with a low 46. So yeah, 3 seconds.
All right, since we're talking about timing, races, they're won and lost in the corners. So let's talk about cornering on that Norco. It has a really high pivot. That means that the rear end can get quite a bit longer, relatively speaking, compared to some of the other bikes as it goes into its travel. What did that do to the bike's handling in the corners, if anything at all?
Yeah, it was still pretty lively, but it was a little bit bigger for me. So I had lots of room to move around the cockpit and like manage where the traction was front and rear. Mm-hmm. But yeah, trying to manual out of a turn or like, get a little bit creative and fancy was a little bit more effort.
Yeah, you really look like you were struggling up there.
You did, yeah. I was having to give some pointers. Bend your elbows, you loser.
Keep those knees in.
Knees in, always.
Henry, let's compare the two bikes, the GT and the Norco, and talk about our favorite word, nimbility.
Nimbility.
Which of those bikes, if you're a rider who maybe you want a big travel high pivot bike, you're not going to race though, so you want to jump and do that kind of stuff. GT, Norco?
You know, they're both good bikes. I think for me personally, I'd be lending towards the Norco. There's nothing against the
Even
GT.
with the coil shock. I just see coil shock and I think ground hugger.
Yeah, it is that, but that's also the type of riding I love. They are both good bikes, but I do think, even with a coil shock, I think the Norco is the easier to get on and ride.
All right, that's enough about how the bike rides. Let's get into some detail on the components and the spec. Matt?
Yeah, the spec is pretty dialed, but there are a couple things that are pretty specific to this bike. So you can't change the shock for an air shock. It has to be run with the DHX2 specifically, or the RockShox Super Deluxe coil. The cable routing is a little bit convoluted. The dropper post, I know it's one up, it works really well, but early on in the test, we might have got some stiction there from that. It does have a lot of bends to feed up through the seat tube. One other thing I think we would have liked to have seen with this bike was maybe a 220 front rotor.
Absolutely.
It did come spec'd on a couple other bikes.
200's not big enough?
I just think for this bike, yeah, it's so capable downhill. Why not have the huge brakes as well?
Yeah, okay. Henry, I want to ask you about adjusting the shock. So I was looking after these bikes while these guys were testing. You're welcome.
No problem.
And I noticed that rebound adjuster on the Fox shock, like, do you adjust it telepathically? How do you turn that dial?
What you need is a young child with very small hands
Okay.
to actually get in there.
Long, skinny fingers.
Long, skinny fingers, and basically that's the way you do it, I think. You've got to have a toddler about the house to say, "Oi, Michael, can I get a click off this bad
Why
boy?"
is he named Michael?
Why not?
Matthew.
That's better, I prefer that.
But it is slightly hard to access.
To be fair, I mean, you're not tinkering with the rebound adjuster that much, but when you do want to make a change, you need a small child to do it for you.
Yeah.
Next up, we're going to talk models and pricing range, which one we would like. So there's 3 complete bikes, the C1 at 9 grand, the C2 at 7 grand, and the C3 at 56, and then the frame is $3,800. Which one of those are you going to choose?
You know, I mean, sometimes with high-end bikes and e-bikes, I think you get a bit desensitized. 9 grand is just too much for a bicycle. It's a bicycle. That 6 grand C3, 5600 C3 represents something like good value to me, in that it gets you the really high-end frame, etc., etc. But then you compare that to the spec that is hanging off the YT, which is $400 more, or the spec, which is still really, really good on the transition. And I think, although it's got really sensible parts, and it's the parts that I would probably spec with my own cash, just like a Dior mix, which is all you really need for a
Hard to
bike.
beat.
Like, this bike isn't something that's going to rip uphill anyway. So I would say the C3 would be the one that I would probably go for. However, compare it to the YT or the Transition, and it struggles to look like a particularly enticing proposition.
All right, we're getting close to wrapping up this range review. We got to get through pros and cons. Tell me the stuff that you liked, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, we know this one has the high pivot, so it's really capable at descending. And the other great thing that it has is with the virtual high pivot versus a single high pivot, it doesn't have the energy kickback that the single high pivot does. It's really muted, really good chassis composure, and then it also has very good independent braking. You don't get the brake squat that some of the other single high pivots do, where they kind of squat the suspension and get into the firmer part of that stroke.
Yeah, I'm going to add a pro of my own as well. This thing is compatible with dual crown forks, and we've seen a few enduro bikes go down that road now, and I think something like this that is so capable, you might as well make it compatible with the dual crown fork, right?
Totally. Yeah, I mean, we're here at Sun Peaks Bike Park. I would love to have a dual crown on this thing and see if it would stack up in a race.
Just can't get the downhiller out of it. All right, Henry, I'm going to lean on you for the cons.
Yeah.
Give them to me.
It is a heavy bike.
Yeah, just over 37 pounds.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on that one, because I think it's great to see a bike that is just about descending. It does have, if you are the kind of person that cares about losing half a watt on a climb, it
Why
does have an idler. heaven forbid
Yeah.
someone should prioritize
It's
suspension
not-
performance over a
It's
little bit of
not.
rhythm.
It's not. It isn't about losing watts. It's about knowing you have another hour and a half of climbing to go and hearing as the chain is rubbing that guide and being shitty.
I mean, this just isn't something I care one iota of fecal matter about.
Okay.
It doesn't bother me at all. I want a bike that prioritizes descending.
Yep.
Idler, who cares?
Fair enough.
One place you might notice a bit of noise is that monocoque can kind of reverberate noise,
Yeah.
and
Matt mentioned that
yeah.
as well too. It's pretty loud.
it can be kind of loud. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, as always, we wrap these reviews up by talking about where and who the bike best suits. Henry, who does the bike best suit?
The bike suits somebody that is tempted to sell their downhill bike and commit to an enduro bike. You know, a couple of years ago when enduro bikes started getting better, oh, you can do anything on an enduro bike, and some of them are kind of crap.
Yeah.
This is genuinely a bike that you could say threatens a downhill bike, even for lift
Really?
access trails. Yeah, well, like you said, you know, you could pedal around for 9 months a year,
Yeah.
the drag of the idler and all, heaven forbid, and then strap a downhill fork on it and go and smash some runs.
Okay. Matt, what type of terrain does this bike best suit? I think I know the answer, but I want to hear it anyway.
Yeah, the steepest, gnarliest stuff. It really carries speed over like chunky terrain, just keeps you nice and neutral on the bike. Even the flatter sections, you can pump through. It's a little bit more effort or just muted with the high pivot, but yeah, the nastier the better for sure.
Yeah, you've mentioned to me a couple times, and I've only heard you say it about this bike, that you want to take this bike home with you and ride it harder and more and faster. And
Yeah.
it's the only bike of the bunch that you've said that about.
Well, I think it really suits the type of rider that is just gonna pedal up an easy road climb, not worry about their time to the top. They're just gonna, you know, shoot the crap with their friends and then just smash out big downhill laps that are only accessible by like a shuttle or something like this. So, yeah.
That sounds like the perfect day on the Norco Range, boys.
It does indeed, yeah.
Right. All right, that is it for our review of the new Norco Range. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more field test videos because we got a whole bunch more coming, and we'll see you in the next one.